Welcome to SEC Football Live on a Saturday. Happy New Year. Merry Christmas. Stephen Godfrey at 38 Godfrey. I'm Braden Gall. Brought to you by ML Rose. 6 great locations in Middle Tennessee. The best burgers and beer in the city. If you are watching on YouTube, we know this is an unusual time. So if you're watching on YouTube, please share notifications, all that good stuff. If you're watching on Twitter or Facebook, please retweet, share the show. And that way people will find us and come hang out for a little while. Bo is already in the comments section. Better late than never. Yes, we understand. Look, Stephen, we cannot control tragedies.
We didn't do it.
We cannot control tragedies that take place in communities in which bowl games are about to happen. And then after that, we had to at least wait until Friday because we wanted to see the end of the Georgia Notre Dame game, which ended up being a fantastic football game, unless, of course, you're Kirby Smart. And then obviously traveling yesterday. So we just had to deal with some stuff this week. So we do appreciate all of your patience and all of your timeliness. We're going to preview the Texas and Ohio State game, take a look at the Penn State Notre Dame game today, maybe talk about some of the news. We will discuss, Stephen and I have been having this debate for basically the entire football season about the I think there's like a smart way and an intelligent way to have a conversation about the power structure of our sport and what's going on with the playoff. And then there's sort of like a Twitter reductive pointing fingers and dancing
Southern way to do it.
I think it has nothing. I think it takes two to tango. You have kids. I have kids. It takes two to tango. It's not one kid's fault. It's both kids' fault. So I'm going to go full parent mode today on the show. But I really want to discuss the actual games because the tournament, I think, so far has delivered pretty good drama and 4 really great teams that are going to decide a championship. So with all that being said, how are the holidays, man? Do your kids need to go back to school as much as my kids need to go back to school?
That and the various forms of pestilence that pass through our house. Yes. I think everyone I've talked to nationally has had some sort of disgusting thing happen to them in the illness department.
My kids have been out of school since December 21st, and they don't go back till the 8th. We are in desperation mode. We are Georgia down by 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, and we need something big to happen soon. Grandpa, where are you?
I also enjoy the fact I don't think this has happened before, but broadcasting during live college football, there's some ancillary bowl game on right now. And have we done this before?
I think we had like the Tax Slayer Bowl or something was going on. So I'm watching. I got a college basketball game on right now. So
I'm watching Liberty and Buffalo in the Bahamas on what is barely legally a sodded field. I don't know if it would pass muster. Yeah, it's bad. It's bad, but it's football. It's college football.
Although Eddie says, hey, we're on a Saturday, so it feels like real college football.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
There we go.
Well, you said that. Hey, we're broadcasting on a Saturday. I was like, is there football? Oh, there is. Yeah. There's legally football on right now.
I have no idea who's on either roster or even who's coaching these teams at this point. But you know what? There is a
both incumbents, Limbo and Chadwell. Which I don't know how many bowl games you could say that about, honestly. I would say less than half of the bowl games featured the head coach of that year coaching against the head coach of that year.
So I want to discuss Texas, Arizona State first. Then we'll discuss Georgia, Notre Dame. Then we'll look ahead to the Texas, Ohio State game. And then we'll have the discussion about the conference and what's happening on the internet and what's happening in real life and on all that stuff. Yes, Frank says Ohio State by a lot. Yeah, that I don't necessarily disagree with that, but we'll get to that in a second. So I want to know the one question I had coming out of the Texas game was like, how should I evaluate Quinn Ewers in that game? Because he put them in a position to have a 2-touchdown lead going into the fourth quarter. He put them in a position to have 2 game-winning drives in the fourth quarter, to which kickers miss kicks. It is what it is. I don't think it's anybody's fault necessarily. It just happens. Mm-hmm. Then he has one of the greatest pre-snap reads and checks in the history of the sport. But like still, and I don't think the average football fan, even the SEC fan, realizes, Godfrey, that like when it's said and done with his career, he's going to be kind of like top 3 in every major metric to measure a quarterback's success at the University of Texas. And obviously one more win over Ohio State puts him into a national championship game, which is Colt McCoy territory with VY. And those are kind of the guys, right? I just want to know how you evaluated Quinn Ewers' performance, because I think we came out of that game with a lot of folks saying like Steve Sarkisian made some big mistakes and Steve Sarkisian did this and Steve Sarkisian did that. And then there's a lot of ripping on Quinn Ewers, which is sort of like, chic to do. But he did kind of consistently, he makes throws to put him up big. He makes throws to give him a 2-score lead in the second half, 2 great drives to give him a chance to win the game. And then again, the 2 back-to-back touchdown passes that are going to go down in history no matter what happens with Texas moving forward. in the history of that program. In a game that Quinn Ewers in Texas will not be remembered the way Cam Skattebo will be remembered for that game.
No, I think people are going to remember first and foremost Arizona State's comeback, the Skattebo performance overall, the fourth quarter, the missed field goals, and the no call targeting hit, and then the idea of evaluating Texas's performance will come somewhere after that. I mean, the bottom line is in the first 3 or 4 drives on both sides of the ball, this looked like a total domination. Yeah. And then Arizona State was really able to take, like, not absorb anything, like take headshots in a boxing match and come back and really didn't get away from what they were good at, didn't get away from the things that, like, they build drives on. They just simply, I give them a lot of credit. I don't, look, we're going to have 2 competing ideas about Steve Sarkisian. I think Kenny Dillingham coached his ass off. I think that they adjusted on the fly against a team that was more talented than them, and they almost probably should have beat them going down the stretch and ended up very even, which is remarkable. That's insane. When you look at those first 4, I want to say 4 drives, I thought, oh God, this is going to be like a 42-0. This is going to be a total blowout.
I thought that Arizona State was hadn't played in a while, showed early in the game. And that's why Texas kind of came out clicking. I think, it takes just as much on defense to tackle. And I think Sarkisian, said it in the pregame. He's like, we're going to find out if they can tackle, which is not like a shot at them. It's just like, we need to find out if they can tackle. And after, all of the start to that game, you're going, whoa. I do think you need fortunate things to happen to make a 16-point, 2-touchdown, 2-2-point conversion comeback in one quarter. That is still, you still need things.
It's definitely an implosion. I mean, this game was 24-8 was the largest gap.
Yes, in the fourth quarter, beginning of the fourth quarter.
They absolutely should have closed this out. And this is kind of a trait within some Sarkisian programs going all the way back to USC or Washington, is that, like, he gets cute. I mean,
you thought he got cute in the fourth quarter?
At certain points, yeah. You could approach this one of 2 ways.
He took a shot. He took a deep shot to Isaiah Bond.
You could do 3 ways, actually. And it's not so much yours to me. I think it's just more the overall, like, holistic play calling offensive culture. This was a great and entertaining game. And that's what we want out of it. Like, you're talking about the tournament. So check mark. That's all I really care about.
I'm kind of the same way. It was fun. I had a great time.
It was to me almost, maybe not remarkable, but very close to it, that Arizona State could cobble something together after those 3 quarters. And they did. And they stayed persistent in a way that didn't really show up because they weren't finishing drives.
Yep.
And then you could also say that Texas blew it. They didn't close. They didn't close against a team that they were better than at almost every position going into the 2 deep. And so it's shocking to me that, this is happening again. There were shades of this. There were shades of this against Clemson. The 2 very fast touchdown drives to bring the game, I want to say within 7. It was 7, right? Not 10.
It was within 7 for 55 seconds in the fourth quarter, and then Blue broke off a 77-yard run. And that was it. And
that was sort of the thing that didn't happen, was they weren't able to just exert talent again and have a big play. And Arizona State kept it muddy, hung on. This is a trend. And by the way, the next opponent, I know we're not going to get there yet, just simply won't give you this opportunity.
No,
if you catch a lead, it's going to be a minor miracle, for one, as fast as Ohio State's playing right now. But this is a system flaw within Texas, because these are 2 vastly different opponents in Clemson and Arizona State with roughly the same outcome. So because when they opened against Clemson, you kind of thought, oh, they're going to dismantle these guys after the first Clemson score.
I did not write everything you just said down about, like, what we're going to remember before we remember Ewers. I think it's the Cam Skattebo game forever. Like, where were you when you watched the Cam Skattebo game?
Yeah, I grew up, and
that's number one. It's also, like, if you think about what we loved about college football in the 90s, Arizona State sort of embodied, and I say the 90s because that's when I was growing up learning about the game. And it sort of embodies everything that I love about it. A coach who's an alumni, a player who sort of does everything because he's too good to take off the field. I am surprised they weren't kicking field goals with him, frankly, considering their problems at that position. And sort of had the drama and the back and forth and the momentum swings. And it's just sort of like everything you love about college football in a game, which is, to your point, what I want first and foremost when I watch anything. Like, I could not. I honestly don't care who wins. I just want to see something special. I asked my 8-year-old, "Who are we rooting for tonight, Dad?" Overtime is my answer to her, and we got that. But you mentioned the targeting thing, and I think you're right that is something that we are going to talk about. I think people have this one all wrong altogether. Not the call itself. I actually don't think we can discuss the merits positively or negatively. I think there's arguments on both sides.
On which thing? What do you mean?
But here's what I want to get to.
Are you talking about the targeting call or the?
I'm talking about targeting that was a no call. But so let me work through this here because this is my take on this. He hit him in the face. Okay. But a big part of the actual language inside the rule of targeting says a lot of like nebulous, vague things about what you can or can't do to define it or not define it. There's a launch and there's the crown and there's intent. And technically the word targeting is about your intent, which has always been the problem with the rule in the first place. But like it was so bang bang that I don't think, Taft could have done anything differently in that situation. But here's what I care about the most. It was a possession changing play that could have altered the outcome of the game. And the previous drive that was also a possession changing play that could have altered the course of the game. When faced with very similar type calls, the hit on Isaiah Bond was a player jumping into him. He didn't hit him in the face. He didn't hit him in the helmet, but it was a defenseless receiver with a player launching to some degree. And they kept their flags in their pockets on both calls.
I don't think that's. I just don't think it was the same call. I think it was tremendously.
There was no intent by. My point is, there's no intent by either player to target the player in. You
can say there's never intent. I mean, like this is the bottom line. Is it was egregious. It was a huge
egregious.
Hit. No. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
He didn't hit him hard at all.
Okay. I think this is a little
could
bit
have hit both of the players.
This is apologia here. I mean, honestly,
no. I think the other guy should have. The Arizona State defensive back could have decapitated Isaiah Bond, and he didn't.
A game swinging call affected Arizona State in a way that you couldn't say the same for Texas. Bottom line.
How is that? Okay, explain. I totally disagree with that subjectively. I think it was called the same for both teams, which is what I want. I want consistency. No. I want consistency. That's what I want.
I think there were two very different plays. I think they happened. Just because they both happened in the pass game, doesn't. I think speed, trajectory, intent, alignment, all these kind of things. By the way, we're getting to a point with targeting where this sort of throw your hands up and say, "Oh, we never know what it is." I mean, it's starting to go away. It's not. I mean, like there's a battery of off-season tackling clinics. This is something that defensive coaches have talked about for a decade, where we have enough of a volume of case studies to say, well, yes, this is, and this isn't, and this is how you handle this. And so this idea of like, well, we just never know what it's going to be, and sometimes it's not, and that's fine. Yes and no. I don't necessarily buy that as an excuse. A huge call swung the game back in Texas's favor. And look, it's much like the decision to go for 2 when you're the underdog. It's just, you want the game to end quickly when you seize momentum as the less talented team. And that was robbed from Arizona State. Now, the better team, the more talented team won out. So I don't necessarily think it's the crime of the century, but I do think it's less about field goal range for me than Arizona State is. It is just hanging onto the ball and maybe some sort of trick play, something that was misdirection or play action out of the run game that was working. I don't think, you mentioned earlier, like if you haven't paid attention to Arizona State all year, they maybe have been one of the poster child for field goal problems and kicking problems. And like, we're going to pull a kid out of the stands a la Mike Leach. So I don't necessarily say, oh, well, if they had been within 35, it was a lock, because
no, of course not.
As you saw on the other side of the field, it definitely wasn't. I mean,
I guess I'm ultimately, I saw because like, this is weird on an SEC show, but I was rooting for the comeback. Like I wanted to see Arizona State.
Well, I think everybody does, unless you're a fan of the incumbent.
This is just God's truth. This is just my truth here. The hit on Isaiah Bond, I was surprised it wasn't called targeting. I was surprised. And so when that interception happens, it totally changes the entire dynamic of the game. They don't make the comeback necessarily if that call's ruled targeting. And I was surprised it wasn't. He jumps off of his feet and leans into a defenseless receiver. I was surprised they didn't call it, but I was glad that they didn't. I was glad that they didn't call that penalty. And so when I saw the next play hit, I said, "Oh my God!" I wanted them to call them as similarly and as consistently as you can. That was my issue. And I don't think, to your point, like so much stuff still had to happen. Arizona State still could have played. Arizona State If you would like to play with a secondary on the field during 4th and 13, please, by all means, try to do that. Like both teams had opportunities to win the game and didn't. I feel good that they called it as consistently as they could have is sort of where I'm at on the targeting stuff. That's all.
I would say just in the short-term hindsight, I think probably the most important thing to discuss here is that Texas has now out-talented two very good football programs and then failed to close. And I do think that there's a play calling issue on the offensive side of the ball with a lead. They are susceptible to big plays, shot plays on defense. And it's funny. It doesn't really matter because I think what they're about to walk into is just simply, I don't think they're going to be in a situation where they're up 2 or 3 possessions. I really don't.
No,
I think they're about to just take it in the teeth. And I think,
right,
I think the defensive tendencies here and when you started this season, you had them in that upper echelon of the SEC, right?
Well, Ohio State, Texas?
Texas. It was like Texas, Georgia, Alabama, right?
Yeah, I think and this is what I like about Ohio State's story, which I think is kind of cute about people that are like, oh, look how good they are now. It's like Ohio State and Georgia were 1 and 2 in the preseason. Texas and Oregon were 3 and 4 in the preseason. This past weekend, I would have said those are the best 4 teams in America still. I think Texas would be at 3, Georgia 4, and I think Ohio State and Oregon were 1 and 2.
Texas I would say Texas right now is definitely the 4th best team remaining.
Talent-wise, I think they're number 1 or 2.
Talent-wise, they're Texas. That's never. I mean, that's never the issue. I think Texas has just been.
My point is, I don't think I had Texas on the top number 1 tier where I would put Ohio State. Like coming into the season, I thought Ohio State and Georgia were 1 and 2 in whatever order you want to put them in, and I don't necessarily disagree. If Carson Beck's playing, we'll get to that. I still think I might put Georgia and Ohio State at 1 and 2. They both have lost 2 regular season games. Ohio State is better, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah,
I do think Texas can play a much better game than Oregon or Tennessee, though. I think. And I think they will.
They might score some more points. Yeah, they might. Yeah, their offense has the. I think their offensive has the ability to handle the defense in maybe. I'm really not trying to like hammer home a bit here. They might score some late when they're trying to come back.
Wow. Okay. So I don't disagree with. I think it is easy.
Remember, you were this incredulous about the Notre Dame pick too.
Not necessarily. I think Ohio. No, I'm not picking against Ohio State. I picked Ohio State to beat Oregon. I picked Ohio State to beat Tennessee easily, and I'm picking Ohio State to beat Texas, and I'll pick Ohio State to beat anyone that plays them in the championship game. I'm picking Ohio State.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, this season is done because of the level that they're playing at.
Penn State and Notre Dame can't beat Ohio State. I'm just saying, but maybe Texas can't either. So what I'm getting at is, and I do have some questions about personnel for Texas that I think makes it interesting because I think our job on this show is to make the case for Texas to pull the upset, not the other way around. We don't have to make the case for Ohio State to win the game. Like. They have 4 NFL players. Will Howard's playing the best game of his career. The defense looks elite, and it looks like they figured out the offensive line issues. That's coming up.
Well, and they don't play call awfully, terribly.
Sure, 100%. That was well done by you.
You're the best wide receiver in football who's like 5 years old. He's a freshman.
Yeah,
and they targeted him twice against Michigan in the second half. Some of this.
It's all Chip Kelly's fault.
It kind of is. Like some of this is not in any way, shape, or form rocket science. Like.
No,
we can talk about Ohio State, but they just woke up and we're about to see a national champion that owes it entirely to getting embarrassed by your hated rival. We've never seen that before, ever.
I am curious about that because I asked that. So I had to get up this morning at like 5 a.m. to do ESPN radio. And one of my theories was if they had won that game against Michigan, they might still be here. They probably beat Tennessee pretty easily and they probably beat Oregon, but it's not going to look like this. They wouldn't be as dominant. Like they're clearly – teams that need motivating. Teams that need motivating. It's a funny thing. They need to be motivated. It's easier to motivate a team when they need motivating. Like it's one of those weird sort of things. But here's what Texas does, though, and I think this is interesting. Again, Ohio State, they're the pick here. I was talking to some Vegas guys about this, and they think the market is overinflating the last 2 performances. That Texas is more of like a 3-point underdog. So that's just worth considering. I don't necessarily agree or disagree, but I'm just throwing that out there. The thing if I am trying to appeal to Texas people and say this is where you can win this game.
Okay.
They have the Thorpe Award winning #1 lockdown corner in America that you could put on Jeremiah Smith and try. You could just try. I don't know if you can win that battle, but you can try. You got 2 safeties that can thump and linebackers that can run, and a defensive line that's really, really good that might be able to do things to the Ohio State defensive line that or offensive line that maybe Tennessee certainly couldn't and Oregon couldn't, that maybe Michigan kind of did. So maybe that, like, these are the arguments you make. I am not trying to convince you to pick Texas at all. I'm just saying if you're trying to make the case, there are some personnel things here that if you're Texas, you're going, okay, we got a guy that we can put on Jeremiah Smith and just see what happens. Like, that's the best you can do with him. You can put someone on him and see what happens. That's the best you got.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to have to be a turnover based.
You don't think their personnel is different than Tennessee? Tennessee's secondary is awful. They have no skill players.
Tennessee had a hell of a pass rush, allegedly.
I'm saying comparing the opponents, Oregon and Tennessee to Texas, Texas has advantages in certain areas.
The last 2 games, I would say Ohio State is so locked in and balanced and aggressive on both sides that I don't see it happening in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I think it's
I don't either, but
yeah,
we're having a conversation here, you know, like
I mean, what scares me the most is Jeremiah Smith. There's sort of like for the last 10 odd years in college football, there's like the Julio test, which is that, you know, the wide receiver is having the moment when some idiot who's like, I'm a draft expert. He's like some blogger. He's like, you know, I'm getting Julio Jones vibes here.
You're about to go blogger on us.
And like everyone's like, that's not Julio Jones. That's someone having a good game.
I'll drive the blog ship off the cliff with you, buddy.
This kid is Julio Jones. This kid is that good.
He's built this. He's T.O. He's built the same way.
Yeah,
as those two for sure.
But which only goes to here is the only discernible upset recipe. The only one I can pull. And the problem is it's already happened. It happened with Michigan, so that's why I don't think it'll ever happen again. Is incredibly reductive offensive play calling from Ohio State.
They just did it 3 games ago,
and I think that is somewhat to do, and this is where I take hell from Big Ten people, is, excuse me, for all the talk of the mega conference, I don't think Ohio State benefited much from a mega conference culture this season. They played Oregon.
Yeah. They beat Penn State on the road.
Okay. they had those damn Ohio State months that they've always had since you and I have been in this industry, where it's like, all right, you're clearly the most talented team in the conference. You're one of, if not the most talented team in the nation, and you're just going to sort of sleepwalk through 5 weeks. And that's kind of what they did going into Michigan, which, by the way, I do realize what I'm saying about Indiana, which is kind of funny. But it's true. It's very, very true.
They crushed. I'll say the narrative around Ohio State not being this good all season is true and false. Like they
haven't been this good.
No, they've not. But they have been the best 2 teams in the country the whole year since the very first word of the season. They have been their defensive metrics are off the charts. Their offensive talent is great. Like I'm not suggesting.
Defense wasn't the problem. I will say this: Knowles was interviewed in post game, and I think he was being very diplomatic about like, oh, we've kind of woken up, we're fixing our mistakes, and I'm like, dog, you give up 13. You give up 13 to Michigan. You weren't the problem.
Right. They've been elite all year.
I think their offense has been incredibly sleepy. Georgia Kirby-esque, honestly. I really do think that.
But 38 against Iowa in a 38-7 game, like Iowa
sucks.
But Iowa's defense is pretty good. And my point is that I think
they haven't looked like this on offense, man.
I agree with you. And I'm not, again, I said that at the beginning of the conversation. Much like the demise of the SEC is vastly overrated, I think the Ohio State's, where did this come from? They've never been this good. Like, no, they've been this good. Jeremiah Smith is 19.
I do believe that. I do believe the SEC is overrated.
That's fair. We'll get to that in a second. But Jeremiah Smith is 19. You don't come out of the box. You know how much better you are after 12 or 14 or 15 weeks than when you're 19 in your first game? Like, you just get better, and that's okay. And I think that's great. Here's one of the angles that I think is most interesting, and this is part of the NIL world and landscape that we live in. The knowledge of the 2 quarterbacks by the opposing coaching staffs in this game is fascinating to me, because Steve Sarkisian and that staff have gone up against Will Howard multiple times, and Quinn Ewers was on the other team. I find that, I don't know if it actually changes the outcome. I don't know if it leads us to anything, but I do think it's interesting. And I think that's a fun angle here that both of these head coaches and coordinators have intimate knowledge of the opposing signal caller, which should change how they do something. I don't know what, but something.
Hasn't this happened once in recent history?
Let's go. We can go in like a championship playoff setting
in a let's say large game set. I'm trying to think. It wasn't Burrow because they didn't see each other.
I mean,
it would drive me nuts. It's gonna happen.
It might have been Jalen. It might have been a Jalen Hurts, Alabama, Oklahoma thing. Maybe.
Oh, I think that was it. Yeah, I think that was it.
But again, not both quarterbacks. Not where like both quarterbacks were on the other team. Or
here's all right. Let me like hammer this down to the most local sort of like
ML Rose. Everybody,
if you're watching or listening to this or whatever, there's a greater likelihood of you being like an Alabama fan instead of a Ohio State fan, right?
Sure.
Imagine, and I know this has happened once. It was like 2017 Alabama loses to Auburn. No, it was 2019. I don't know. One of those Alabama teams that won a national championship. Their only loss of the season was to Auburn. The difference, and I argued this, I wrote a column about this the other day in the Post. Could you imagine a one-loss Bama team that goes in and is absolutely highly favored at home in Tuscaloosa and gets absolutely embarrassed by Auburn, and then comes out and finally plays to their actual peak performance, they meet their limit in such a dominating fashion that they go on to win a national title?
I don't think it's possible in the previous structures of the
playoff. It's definitely not. No. That was the other thing I had to argue in the Post was like what you're seeing is
that this is a new thing we're going to grapple with in the offseason, which is teams that
my kicker in the column was I'm not inadvertently trying to damn the 12-team format by saying it's diminishing the regular season, although like you have a situation where in any Ohio State Michigan result or Iron Bowl result or any whatever Florida State, with the exception of 97, which is a super weird year. If you lose this major game against your opponent, against your rival, against your arch rival, the team you hate the most, that defines your season. And for Ohio State, it's going to define the season, but in a completely weird way. Like they owe the Michigan loss to what they're doing right now, and we've never seen that before.
And I think vice versa. They owe the championship to the format, because in a previous format it doesn't happen. Alabama 2017, one of the only double-digit losses Nick Saban ever took in SEC play was 2017 at the end of the year. Now that game was not in Tuscaloosa, but it was in Auburn. But they lose 26-14. They were undefeated at the time. They were number one in the nation. They then they don't play. And this is where they benefited. This is the difference. Ohio State benefited as well. Alabama doesn't play in the SEC championship game. They destroy Clemson in I think that was Kelly Bryant game where he started for Clemson. And then they beat Georgia in overtime with Tua coming off the bench and the whole deal. But that is very similar to undefeated, one of the best teams in the country, mostly considered one of the best teams in the country, lose to your arch rival fairly easily, double digits. Again, very rare in Nick Saban's territory. And then comes back and boom and wins a national championship. So it's the only thing I can, because as soon as you said that, I was like, I think there was one that happened where that was the thing. And because I remember losing by 12 in the conference is not something Nick Saban ever really did. He was not a double-digit loser in almost any of the games, other than maybe Joe Burrow. And even the Joe Burrow game, I think they almost won.
The A&M upset, the Ole Miss upsets, there's only, 9 or 10 upsets total?
There's not a lot of them.
They are all actually within a possession.
Yep.
People have a false memory of that second Ole Miss upset because it was a blowout, and then they came back because they pulled like Cooper Bateman or something.
Joe Burrow and LSU beat everybody by 30 points, and they lost 46-41.
Yeah, that was
a great game.
That was like the best game of the year and it was probably the only interesting, engaging LSU game all year because they just killed everybody.
Yeah. So I don't know where we're at here.
It's insane to me because, and I want to say this very briefly, and then I do think we've kind of talked it out, but I would just, if someone is still super butthurt, and there's like, I saw some Tennessee reporters who are like, after the Georgia loss, we're just all mad about like this seeding is screwing up. I was like, okay, let me offer you one thing. If Ohio State can take one of the 11 touchdown drives that they've had in these last two games or whatever it is, just pluck one out and put it against Michigan in the fourth quarter, and they win 17-13.
They're number one, and
the seeding of this thing is going to look a lot more rational. I'm not saying it's perfect.
No, I'm pissed if I'm Oregon, not if I'm an SEC fan. I don't.
But it would change the Oregon thing completely because we would have had the Oregon rematch in the Big Ten championship, and theoretically,
Oregon would have been 5.
Right, like it starts, and then we don't have. I'm gonna be honest. Like if you want to mea culpa for me,
well, but
Oregon,
what you're doing now is you're like, well, if we hadn't fumbled that ball twice, we would have won the game. You're doing that now, and like it's
no. What I'm saying is, don't use one season as like everyone's gonna try and blow this thing up in the off season.
Well, I would
one more set of data, 3 more sets of data. That's kind of that's what. You're
what about someone who was? What about someone like me who was trying to blow it up before all of this happened? Because I thought the reseeding and the seeding issues were a problem the day they announced the structure of it.
Yeah, the weird thing is, I don't think anybody's not you, but I don't think anyone's listening.
No, I don't disagree. Well, they're not going to do.
They're going to seed the top 4 teams and make them the 4 teams from the Big Ten SEC championship. That's not going to work.
Well, so here's what's going to happen. There's not going to be any changes for next year. I'll just tell people right now. The management,
probably, yeah.
The management council, the playoff, whatever they call it, the college football management committee council or whatever, is going to meet in the spring, and they are not going to change anything because the changes have to be voted on unanimously. The only thing that might pass through is like reseeding after the first round.
I think reseeding might happen.
That might pass through. They will not change anything until the next year when it goes to 26, when they can expand to 14. And then you know what doesn't happen? You don't need unanimous votes to get the changes through. You just need the Big Ten and the SEC to make those changes. So that's where what's been told is that four you've said this a long time, and I agree with you. It's completely absurd. 4 for the Big Ten, 4 for the SEC, 2 for the ACC, 2 for the Big 12, 1 for the G5, and 1 at large. That's so dumb to me. It's so dumb.
Yeah, the guaranteed by conference thing definitely sucks. I don't want to get into that, but I will say this. I don't want to get into that because I've said my piece. I think it's really, really bad for football. But the 14-4, if you took the NFL structure, you solve all of the problems that no one wants to talk about publicly, which is that, hey, conference championships make us a ton of money. So we have to have leverage stakes there. Like something has to be at play. And so right now with 4 seeds, what's going to happen more often than not is they're going to say, okay, well, Texas lost. They're still one of the 4 best teams. So like, what was the point of doing that? They're going to get a bye. Yeah. But if you have 14 teams and 2 buys, then you
can't lose a conference championship game and still get a bye. No, I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm with you. I think that's where it's going to go.
Honestly, we should just get rid of the conference championship games.
I don't disagree with you. Roy Kramer made them and invented them out of thin air because of a Division III rule in Virginia in like the 80s, and he did it to make money.
And it does.
And it makes a lot of money.
And it makes a lot of money.
No, I'm with you. All right. So ML Rose, by the way, if you'd like to spend a very small amount of money on a very high quality product, they are the craft beer and delicious burger location in Nashville. There's 6 of them. If you're in town, if you're an alumni or if you're living in the area listening to this, please go check out ML Rose. They're a great local company that does a great job sort of trying to support their neighborhoods with customized menus and beer taps for all the people that are in those neighborhoods. They put their money where their mouth is when it comes to the community. So Austin and all those guys over there, Julie, you guys are awesome. So go check out ML Rose, one of 6 great locations all over the mid-state area, and tell them we sent you. So there you go. Check them out. The game itself, there's 2 myths I'm going to bust later on because I know people were screaming about, the officials, to your point about the targeting call. Oh, the officials want the SEC in there. I don't think people think through any official ever on any sport, what it would actually take in reality from an execution standpoint to have a league office or broadcast partner actually dictate, officiating in real time. I think people don't understand that. But Kirby Smart got a bad call at the end of the game on the brilliant decision by Marcus Freeman with 2 players jumping in a false start. But you know what? Them's the breaks. That's what football is. And you got to overcome that stuff. And Georgia did.
Yeah, but the SEC came out. The SEC came out against Kirby, right, and said that it is legal.
Well, the 2 players jumped off. They were false. It was a false start that they just missed. But again, it was
you're talking about the 11. I thought you were talking about the 11 sub.
No, it was a brilliant coaching move by Marcus Freeman. And sometimes you just tip your cap. And guess what? Don't jump off sides, Georgia. So my point is my point is for either argument, for Big Ten fan or SEC fan or anti-SEC or pro-SEC, stop complaining about officiating deciding games. They don't. Players decide games. Coaches decide.
Oh, no, yeah.
Stop with that. Stop.
Yeah, no. I think Notre Dame was the team that was going to win that game, and Texas was the team that was going to win that game.
Notre Dame had a different level of intensity from the first snap than I can remember a Notre Dame team playing with. They matched Georgia's physicality and intensity, unlike most teams that can play in that game with Georgia. I give Notre Dame all the credit for that. Marcus Freeman deserves all the credit for that.
Yeah.
And they played that game. Did Gunnar Stockton play a better game than we expected? Probably. Maybe to sometimes some chunks of time in that game.
I look, I think you should grade. I think he gets a higher grade than most people would give him because
probably, yeah.
This look, everyone's it would have been a different game with Carson Beck. Guys, the only way Ole Miss won that game in Oxford was by delivering a consistent level of pass rush, both on the edges and the interior, layered in. It was probably like Pete Golding's best game he's ever called. He would probably tell you that. Seriously, how the hell he took at Alabama. And Notre Dame lined up and said, we can do that. We feel good enough about winning one-on-one matchups in the pass rush, and also really disguising blitzes, using a variety of stuff, sending 4 and getting home. I mean, I don't want to simplify everything down to that, but it's a pretty easy way to tell the story of that game. I'm not going to take a victory lap, although I should, on the Georgia's offense is reductive thing, because I do throw that out when you are talking about, hey, we're going into the biggest game of the season in the postseason, and we're starting a kid,
it's first game.
We're introducing to America.
Yeah,
I will say though, they really couldn't do much to bail him out. So I would lend more to your explanation this past year about Georgia, which was Carson Beck didn't have his safety valves, his blankets, whatever you want to call it. Sure as hell weren't showing up for Gunnar Stockton because they're not on the roster right now.
Their go-to big play in the second half was a wheel route to a third-string running back.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm not going to. I'm not going to swing the hammer too hard on. Maybe I should go dig up that Twitter thread just for fun.
No. Look, I had Seth. Here, I would like to hear your reaction to this, because I had Seth Emerson on the show. We had the video on YouTube, and of course they put it on the podcast feed as well. And I asked him that question. I said, how do you feel like this game unfolds? And he's like, his theory was they were going to throw it a little bit more, because it's the I know you know what I know kind of thing.
I think they wanted to.
And they did. They threw a bunch of slants.
Yeah.
He was connecting on slants. They took some deep shots, and he hits Jordan Bell in the hands. Hits him in the hands. And I do think, and this is not a knock on Notre Dame or a positive for Georgia, the game was way closer than the score indicated. It took a fumble by Georgia and a dumbass decision, and then a kick return to actually make it a game that wasn't close. And then it was kind of close. So I just think it was a very evenly matched football game, like we thought on paper. But I asked Seth Emerson, I said, what do you make of the offense, and is it going to affect, Kirby likes to be a little safer and all these things. And he was like, well, they haven't had a conservative offense since Todd Monken was hired, was his line. And he's on the beat. So I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
God. It's like they're all trying to earn service points with Kirby. Having a high scoring offense and having a conservative offense are not mutually exclusive.
I agree with you.
And also, look at your playbook this year.
I think Monken. I think he's right about Monken.
Oh, Monken is a dynamic offensive coordinator.
Look at Georgia Tech.
I would definitely like to see.
That's a Todd Monken acolyte right there.
I would definitely like to see, all things considered in health, going back Zay Flowers dropping that ball. Baltimore, he could easily guide an offense to a Super Bowl and a national title. Was it
within 5 years?
4 or 5? Yeah, 5 years apart. That is not easy to do. That is not easy to do. And talk about wildly different personnel that he would do it with.
True. It does help to have one of the most unique weapons in all of NFL history and the best roster in college football modern era as well. It does help, but that's not to knock on him. I don't want to do that.
There aren't a lot of offenses where if you are that effective at getting push and just sort of living in the backfield, this is why I say, I'm looking at the comments now and they're like, oh, you can't say it wasn't a different game with the quarterback. Yeah, sure. It might've been different with Beck. Absolutely. Beck, I think, might've been good for probably one more possession, one more touchdown. But the idea that Georgia's winning that game if Beck's in, go watch the Ole Miss game. This offense does not have what it had in the last 5-6 Georgia seasons.
Brock Bowers is not only going to have the greatest receiving season in the history of all rookies in the NFL, but he's going to have the greatest receiving season in the history of tight ends in the NFL. He's
Bowers, McConkey.
Yeah. Kenny McIntosh. Yeah.
Dude, how about just Pickens? Yeah. Like they don't have a person. And so I'm not blaming or excusing Georgia because, hey, they didn't have the personnel this year. But that's when you earn your damn money as a coordinator. And I do think Bobo is conservative. Yes. And I do think I guarantee you, look, what I'm about to say makes total sense. If you had Georgia's defense and you were going into a game against Riley Leonard in that offense, you would say we can win this thing on defense and let's gut it out. And by the way, there's some data that would prove that, Braden, because they fumbled twice on 2 scoring drives and they gave up a special team score.
Right.
But
it was a fairly close game like we thought.
But those things that happened did happen. And this is when you get bit in the ass for being conservative on offense.
I guess my question is because I don't disagree with your point on that. I think they were. It's funny to be like, I don't think they were bit in the ass for Gunnar Stockton, but also experience would have helped at that position. But I do go back to the weaponry not being there all year. But like, man, they torched an elite Texas defense on the road. And they beat another Texas. I think the Texas game in the SEC championship game is more.
I think my argument with you is Texas's defense elite. I think we might.
It's top 3. It's top 3.
Okay.
I mean, I'm putting Ohio State, Georgia, Texas.
Top 3? About like in recruiting composite?
No, in like metrics, production, talent, combination of everything. Like all of the ways to sort of. If you just say what's the best defense in America, I think you can make a case for Ohio State, for Georgia, for Texas. Mm-hmm. I think front 7 you can make a case for Ole Miss. I think Oregon had a very good defense, but not in that top tier. I don't think Michigan's defense is top tier, but they're very close. I think Penn State's front 7 is elite, but I don't know about the back end.
Shout out to Lane saying we're only was it yesterday they played? 2 days ago, Lane was like, we're only getting started. And I was like, we can all see who's leaving here, right? You're just getting started. What are you getting started on?
Well, by the way,
Liberty Bowl next year?
By the way, people thought he was taking a shot at Diego Pavia. Is it not just Lane being Lane?
I think honestly, people are I think they parsed his social media in a way that they don't anyone else's.
He does it's a pregame comment, right? And they're
asking, why Texas had a good defense this year. Who the hell did they play?
Okay. All right.
Jesus.
Same Notre Dame. And you just got done saying
Notre Dame won.
You just got done saying Ohio State didn't play anybody either. No, I want to. Let's stay on.
I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh well, they did hold Oklahoma to 3. I'm like, that's what you got here.
Look, they have very good personnel and they've got very good metrics and they are in the semifinal. So with the same number,
chat's anchoring down.
Same number of losses as Georgia, as Ohio State, as Oregon, as all these other teams. So
super fun thing. I'm going to jump in and interrupt real fast. One super fun thing about all of this conversation on Texas and Ohio State. One of these teams is losing and turning around and preparing to play that team again.
Yep.
I kind of love that.
Which is actually what happened.
By the way, for those of you who don't know, Texas and Ohio State are opening the season against each other.
And it's also exactly what happened when they played back-to-back with Vince and Ohio State back in like 04 and 05.
Because there's a Rose Bowl in there, isn't there?
It was a home and home, I think. Yeah. So very interesting stuff there. Anyway, look, I think let's wrap up this conversation with the reductive conversation about like I think this conversation about the SEC in the future and the Big Ten and college football, like I find it to be exhausting and meaningless because until another league has all of the players and championships, the Big Ten has more money, makes a little bit more money per team than the SEC does. They have more eyes and ears, which this is my least favorite discussion point is that the ESPN is somehow on the take for the SEC of number one, everybody's in favor of their own bottom line. And you know what draws numbers and money for ESPN? Penn State and Ohio State and Notre Dame. Like those are 3 of the biggest brands that will have the biggest fan bases watching games in the biggest numbers.
Yeah. If they were cheering again, if they were rigging it against anybody, it was Boise. Trust me.
No, yes,
Clemson.
I agree.
Have we talked about this on the show before? Secretly,
totally
how ESPN executives were taking a bath during all those Clemson national titles.
This is what I don't understand about so I understand taking your victory lap, dancing on the grave of the SEC when you win. I think that's the whole point of sports. Like that's why we play the game. Like how many times did the Mets get to dance on the Braves' grave or the Yankees' grave? Never. So we do it a lot when it happens because we don't get to do it very often. Sure. So like go for it. I think it's great. I got no problem with that. But you know what would make ESPN money and their shareholders money? Notre Dame versus Ohio State. That will make them a fortune more than Clemson versus Georgia or Alabama versus LSU or whatever. Like, it's just not going to make them as much money. So I always thought that part was very foolish to engage in. And the Big Ten has not won back-to-back national championships since the 1960s before integration. So I don't know how that's relevant to any of this either. They have better. Ohio State is better. Notre Dame was better than Georgia this year. Why does it have to be more than that? I don't understand.
Here's why.
Now,
for the last 15 to 20 years, the SEC has used the, I guess, sort of like regional zeitgeist of the South to utilize a brand that's built on keeping others out and unifying your league above all else. The easiest case in point is that I have covered this game across the country at every corner of it, and there's only one league that chants its name. That's it.
They don't do that anymore.
They do all the time. Like this idea that they don't do it is hilarious to me. The Big Ten at its apex has never done this. I sat next to my father-in-law who was cheering aggressively for Georgia for no reason. And I looked at him and I said, you do know that, like, if Georgia were to win this game and win the national title, that's going to be worse for LSU.
Yes.
But they don't care. They default to the South. The SEC very wisely 20 years ago utilized this fear and xenophobia and built it into a brand. So I agree with you at everything you said, which is it's incredibly dumb to be reductionist about this, but those are the terms that the SEC set. And so now we are on the eve of either a second Big Ten national championship or maybe Notre Dame, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think the two best teams left in this tournament are both in the Big Ten, and they're probably going to play each other. So
stop. Penn State's number 4 because of James Franklin. But
Penn State's
keep going. Keep going.
Do you think Penn State's going to beat Notre Dame?
I like Notre Dame.
Either way, you're not like. I mean, look. Either way,
Ohio State's going to win the whole thing.
The fourth best team in this tournament is the one playing Ohio State right now. That's hard for SEC fans to understand and feel, and I mean that's fine. Like everyone was pretty like.
I think
this is a dumb conversation, but for the SEC fan base to say this is a dumb conversation, you guys set the terms 20 years ago. You've pushed it throughout the Saban era, and what's really chapping people's asses right now is that we are post NIL and the SEC is not as dominant. There's a leveling out in college football across rosters, and Big Ten fans
that is the most important conversation.
Big Ten fans now have the luxury of saying, well, now that we can pay everybody, the SEC is not as dominant. Is that true? 60%.
I think the most, this is why, like, again, the whole, like, I don't get on Twitter much anymore. I don't really care about the regionality of the whole thing. Like, I grew up from a Big Ten family, raised in a Big Ten family, but I went to an SEC school. I've loved both conferences equally my whole life. It just is what it is. No one believes me when I say that, but it's just the facts. I was raised in a University of Wisconsin family. I loved Ron Dane as a kid. Like, I went to, the Russell Wilson, Kirk Cousins Big Ten championship game in 2011. I took my father. I've got a photo of me in a Badgers jersey. Like, it just, my Big Ten bona fides, I don't have to defend that. I don't have to defend my SEC. I think, what does the future of the sport look like across the leagues? And from a talent perspective, is it truly being dispersed and spread out because of NIL? I think that's a great discussion that's more important than, like, the headlines are like, now that the SEC no longer runs college football. I'm like, what are you talking about? The SEC and the Big Ten run the sport. They make all the decisions about the sport.
Yeah, what they're referring to is that you don't have a dominant SEC team, and you don't.
Okay, great. I don't understand why that. Now, okay, before we
get
to
that. The SEC could always claim that. That's why.
Sure, except for every 10 years, it doesn't. 2014, 2002, USC.
Guy, we're getting past one more year, though. This is what I'm trying to tell everybody. It's getting to be a different landscape. We're seeing something different.
I think that is the interesting conversation about the future of the sport. What does it actually look like? Because if Oregon all of a sudden has more resources to acquire players than LSU, Georgia, Tennessee, and A&M, then I think we are in a different landscape. But I need to see more than one game of data before I say that that's what's happening. Now let me go back to your the SEC chant thing just for a hot second, because you don't know this about me, but I worked for SiriusXM for 10 years, and I went on there and said the exact same thing to our entire country listening to college football sports talk that you said to your father-in-law, which is that I don't understand why you are rooting against your own best interests by doing this chant. I don't understand. If you're a Tennessee fan and you're chanting SEC at Ohio State when Florida wins in 2006, you are hurting Tennessee's chances to recruit players if Urban Meyer gets stronger. Like, that's just a fact. And so I think it was absolutely true in the mid 2000s. I think into the late 2000s. I think around I'm going to say like 2014. I'm just going to pick a random time. I have not heard it. I've gone to games in like 6 different stadiums. I still do sports talk radio. I don't see it on Twitter anymore. I have not seen. I think it has decreased significantly because I think people like you and I have been telling folks. We don't get credit for it. I just mean people came to realize that they were rooting against their own best interests. It doesn't mean they don't have pride in their region, but I'm saying this to Big Ten fan right now. If you're a Wisconsin fan, my dad, and I say, Dad, if Penn State wins the championship and James Franklin gets over the hump, it's going to make them harder to beat in your conference. It's going to make them recruit better. They're going to have more appeal to recruits, and they're going to be better. You don't want Penn State to win a championship. You would want maybe Notre Dame because they're not in your conference, maybe Texas because they're not going to recruit the same players. But you don't want Ohio State to keep winning, and they don't. And my dad doesn't want Penn State to keep winning because it hurts Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see that as much anymore. I certainly don't hear it at bowl games anymore. I don't hear it in national championship games. Like it hits me hard when I hear it. It doesn't happen very often, in my opinion.
It still happens, definitely. You know, the magnitude of which I'm not going to try and debate something that's immeasurable.
Yeah,
it's not something that we can. But the attitude set in place by the SEC to its fandom, it was created by the fandom. The SEC seized upon it and then kind of spit it back out to them as doctrine, which is good marketing, but it is literally how you build a cult. And they're paying the price for this now. I'm seeing this across social media from SEC mouthpieces of like, oh, this debate is awfully silly, or hey, I'm so glad they finally caught up to us. I was like, guy, I don't think people understand how fast the earth is moving underneath the feet of college football.
I think that is the smarter conversation. Like
SEC fandoms don't like to have smart conversations at their own expense.
I would argue Big Ten fan doesn't either. That's not a unique property. Big Ten fan has been
never met a Big Ten fan.
Big Ten fans yell at me, and I don't know. Big Ten fans have been mad at me for over a decade because I had the audacity to think that the SEC was a better conference.
Bo says in chat, and if the field was 16 for the playoff, Ole Miss is probably still in it. I don't know what else I could do for you people. I don't know what else I can do, guys.
You mean still in it, meaning they're still playing? Is that what you mean, Bo?
I guess.
Oh, I think you mean still in the tournament, like it's in the tournament.
South Carolina lost, Alabama lost. Like,
I don't care about bowl games. You know that.
Oh, we don't care about bowl games now. Okay.
No. See, this is what I fucking hate. Godfrey, you're better than this.
Here's the deal. For a fucking month, all I heard was this tournament would be better with South Carolina and Alabama in it.
Not on this show.
But in the media. On social media, they were going, "Oh, you know what? We need South Carolina in here. We need Alabama in here." And then they lose
when they go 9.
Like, "Oh, it's
dude, I will pull the. But I will. You're talking to me though. I will.
Illinois got screwed. Yes, Louis. I will say if Illinois was still in it, it'd be awfully salty.
Fucking
hey, can we talk about?
That was a great. Well, yes, we should talk about that. Yes, we should.
Pro wrestling level.
I went on. I wish I could pull tape to play for you. I would go on the air every February and I would say the SEC's 9-1 bowl record doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything if your league wins all the games in the bowls, and it doesn't mean anything if your conference loses all the game. What matters is the conferences don't matter anymore.
Chad says it's the SEC and the Big Ten. No one else matters.
Yes, that is what the Big
Ten. A team that's not from either one of those conferences just kicked shit out of Georgia. So it's like, guys, identitarian politics only works if you do it all the time.
They're a Big Ten team. Let's be honest. The Big Ten gets credit.
A Big Ten team. I'll be honest with you. That pass rush, like outside of Ohio State and Michigan, that's the core conceit of the problem with the Big Ten the last couple of years. Athletically, Notre Dame looked.
It is
southern on defense.
It does, and especially who does look southern on Notre Dame? The young players, the players Freeman recruited specifically. They look.
Boy, you want to have an SEC conversation? Looks like old boy in Baton Rouge was mistaken about what the problem was.
We have a lot of offseason for that. But again, if you are the bully and you've been the bully forever, and then you get punched in the face on the playground, you got to get laughed at
really hard.
You get laughed at. Yeah. You get laughed at, and you got to take your medicine. That's totally fine.
Hit dog hollers.
That's totally okay. It does not. What I'm saying is 1 year does not change the facts of the last 35 years. What will change the facts of the future, because it's not about the ruling class. The ruling class is the board of directors for the SEC and the Big Ten. Like those are the presidents of the universities are still making all the decisions. It's still the SEC and the Big Ten are in control of all of this. What will change actual conference domination, because it's never going to be players moving north. That's not a thing. It's how do you get them to move north while their families are still in the South? And that is where NIL comes in. And so that's the ultimate question is how do you are you actually going to get dispersed talent over a long period of time, over a large geographic area, or is this just a bunch of Georgia didn't have their starting quarterback and they were cycling down this year, and Texas is this and Ohio State was that, and how do we know? Well, we need more data is what we need to.
Quinshon Judkins it would be interesting if he was a determining factor in the outcome of the next two games. It'd be very interesting.
I think he's been a pretty big factor.
Well, I think Smith has just overshadowed so much, and I think Howard's played better, and the offensive line has solved some problems mainly because of the play calling.
Yeah, that's true.
I think it's hard to isolate Judkins as a change agent in one of these games because of the way the passing game is gone. But obviously, what I'm getting at is that kid got paid
a lot of money.
A lot of money. People dispute how much. I don't think it was 2 commas, but I think it was close. And the reason why he got that money specifically was because Ole Miss basically said, "Hey, we've given you 2 raises, if you will, but we want to put our funds somewhere else." So what I'm getting at is, I don't think where you're from matters at all. I mean, there's not a lot of NFL talent in Minnesota. The Vikings are still going to win a Super Bowl. We're getting
closer to that.
Yeah.
And that's really the question. It's not about what we've seen on the field this year or last year or next year or 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Like none of that's what matters. What matters is what, because the number, because I worked for the recruiting service that we've done huge studies on this. We have the information up until NIL, which is the number one determining factor of where you would play college football is geography. Full stop. It's always been geography. It's number one with a bullet. Well, the question is where's geography going to be in the future?
It had to be.
That's the question.
It couldn't have been any other answer.
Right. Well, I mean,
now it can.
Like Pete Carroll would be great at USC. Like he could recruit like crazy. You know what I'm saying? Like there's guys that could overcome the geography thing.
You don't have to overcome it at USC though.
Well,
saying a development program like Oregon State or something.
No. What I mean is there's still not that much. There's still not enough talent to feed an entire conference, as we've learned on the West Coast with the state of California, a little bit of Texas, some Arizona, a couple players from Utah, from Washington, from Oregon. You can't sustain enough national powerhouses, Washington, USC, Oregon. You can't sustain enough of those with that amount of players. This was the Big Ten's problem for 20 years. They didn't have enough. Ohio State took all the good players. And I'm being very broad and generic here. But what we're seeing now, to your point about the Vikings, is if geography is no longer the determining factor about being good in this sport, it used to be geography and money. Now it might just be money and money.
It's just money.
And if that's the case, then we will see an evening out across all programs for a long period of time. And we haven't seen that yet. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but we haven't seen it yet. And I think
within the next 3 seasons, the SEC will win a national title. I don't think you'll ever see a sustained amount of dominance from any one area of the sport with this particular rule set.
And we both believe that rule set probably gets tweaked pretty hard in the next 5 years, 8 years.
I'm not trying to be like coy. It's just that we haven't seen the house settlement details yet. And the one thing that no one on any corner of this problem is come out and said is so on the side that's trying to push against the labor thing, no one said, "Hey, we're finally going to declare these guys employees." And then on the other side, no one has said, "Hey, we think we can make them employees." And the reason why that's so important is it would be able to lock in regulations on NIL compensation, that would have to kind of snap into place, like a legal framework. So the reason why I'm saying all this, which I know is unfun and not cool to talk about, like it's not football, is that this sort of we can pay him as much as we want. You could ask for an NIL raise, the whole Mike Gundy thing for the offseason. That's going to keep happening, I think, for at least 2 more seasons, unless House comes out in. I keep saying House. That's House versus NCAA, by the way. Maybe March, we think now. Here's the fun thing. We should probably just enjoy these last 3 games because I just think that
agreed.
You can't zoom out right now. Your brain won't allow you. There's been so much change. That's why I made a podcast this year called Who Killed College Football.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's hard to
the
decide.
Underpinning of this sport is so weird right now.
It's hard to know.
We're going to look back in 20 years at that period from I would say 19 pre-COVID NIL becomes legal to maybe from 2018, 2019 to 2028, 29 and say that sport changed more in that decade than it did in the previous century.
I tend to agree. I also think the game it changes a lot all the time. We had an advent of the conference championship game in the 90s, along with an entire creation of a conference in the Big 12, along with a bunch of movement finally and coaches' salaries skyrocketing. There's been a lot of change for a long time in the sport. It's definitely been earth shattering today. I don't connect necessarily yet the earth shattering change with Notre Dame beating Georgia. I think it's a great win for Notre Dame. They deserve the credit. I don't think we should take away from Notre Dame the fact that they just out-physicaled Georgia. I think they should just get credit for that. I do think what's interesting about the there's a recruiting, and then there's the rule changes, and then there's the house settlement and all that stuff. I think it's interesting. It's hard to understand where it's all going to land.
Yes.
It's hard to understand. So I agree with you there. There's no question about that. All right. At 38, Godfrey ML Rose. Of course, I do want to touch on Shane Beamer and Brett Bielema if you want to go on that. I think that's.
Real fast.
I still don't understand exactly what happened, but
I think that we have short-term memories in this sport, but if you go back to I'll do this real fast. 2017, Bielema decided his path to success when he was at Arkansas was to troll the shit out of the pace of play argument with Gus Malzahn and Auburn. I don't know if people remember this, and he was sort of acting on the behest of Nick Saban. There was this whole. It was one of the few media days events where I was like, "Oh, this is fun." They're acting like idiots.
This gesture goes back to Bielema thinking the game should have a shot clock or something.
That goes back to the joke basically is it's not a joke at all. It's the percentage of injured players on special teams and substitutions and all this stuff. I still can't figure out if he was responding to something that maybe the parabolic mics didn't pick up. I think maybe there was an accusation that they were screwing with the injury status thing, if Illinois was, and that he was responding back to them like, "Oh yeah, we're cheating," after I go check on an injured player, or if he was screwing with Shane because he thought they were.
I think he thought Shane was doing something on the kickoff.
Yes.
That's what I thought.
But then coming away from his own injured player and doing that, look, I want to be honest. We don't really need to know. It only because the effect is still achieved, which is
Shane Beamer losing his mind.
He fucking taunted at midfield like this shit is WWE. I've never seen anything like it. Are
you surprised it's Brett Bielema and Shane Beamer though?
No. That's what's so great. I was like, shit. I wish they'd sign a 1-and-1.
I know.
No,
immediately.
What I was referencing was that Bielema used to do these kind of Bielema used to talk shit when he was at Arkansas.
Yeah. Well, when he was at Wisconsin, he was a shit talking defensive lineman at Iowa. What are we talking? This is who Brett Bielema is, which is fine.
All right, real fast. We'll get out of here on this. I've never had a coach show up for an interview like I had him one time. He was an hour and 15 minutes late. It was during spring ball. I could tell this whole story real fast. He walked in.
Did he have a case of Busch Light?
It was on a Monday. It was like April or something. And he walks into the Arkansas football offices, the top floor where the head coach's office is, barefoot on a carpet floor, barefoot, came into the building barefoot is what I'm saying. Got out of his doorless Jeep barefoot. He had, Braden, the most raccoon eyes I've ever seen. So if you put a pair of Oakleys from 1994 on, and then you never took them off for 6 days in the desert, he had that level of raccoon eyes. And he just walks up and he goes, "What's your name, man?" He goes, "All right, just hang on, brother. The late kicked my ass." And then he goes into his office for 15 or 20 more minutes to sort of calibrate. And then we did the interview. And what I remember was he was beet red all over except here. But he had that kind of crappy, Hawkeye. He has the Iowa tattoo on his ankle,
on his leg. Yeah.
And it's just blazing. And I'm just like, this guy is an SEC head coach.
Yeah.
And that's how he greeted me. And he, the entire time, You know that, like, when you're sitting with your buddy at breakfast and it's like a bachelor weekend or whatever, and you're like, "Oh, dude, please don't throw up on the table."
Yeah.
Like where he's like, kind of
not here, dude.
You got
not here.
These like throat noises and stuff, and I'm like, is this guy gonna fucking throw up right now?
Go to the fucking bathroom, dude. What are you doing? Get out of
like
here.
Sitting at his big head coach desk, and I was just like, Jesus Christ. Also, I remember this distinctly. This is the last thing I'll say. There was more Iowa shit on the walls of that office in Arkansas than I've ever seen. Like, yeah, everyone has an alma mater or whatever, and if you care, you care. But I just remember thinking, I was like, there's a I don't even think he has an Arkansas helmet in here. It's like all Hayden Fried newspaper clippings.
Which of course will really make my father, the Wisconsin fan, happy, because he had just come from a very successful stint as the Wisconsin head coach, not the Iowa head coach. The last joke I have on this, ML Rose, Stephen Godfrey at 38 Godfrey.
Bielema would love ML Rose.
Yeah, yes, he would. Great beer, great burgers. My favorite thing I've seen so far to date is any joke related to, well, remember the last time the South had to start paying its labor force?
Oh, God.
That is my favorite.
And on that note, I'm taking my headphones off.
Marcus Freeman's wearing a Union soldier.
Gotta go.
It's so funny. Come on, you got to admit that's funny. All right. Hang out at ML Rose, everybody. Make sure you check out Split Zone Duo, whocouldacollegefootball.com, right? Is that correct? I got that right?
Yeah, WKCFP.
There you go. If you're YouTube, thumbs up, notifications, all that good stuff. At Braden Gall on Blueski. And Twitter, I guess I'm still there. Otherwise, I'll have some stuff for you guys on the YouTube and for the podcast feed, like we've had the last few weeks, as it pertains to the Texas Ohio State game. So we'll keep you previewing there. Otherwise, have a good one, everybody. Happy weekend. Enjoy it. We'll talk to you next time. For Steven, I'm Braden. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you next time.